Welcome everyone to a bonus episode of Runners Roundtable. And in this episode, I am joined by one of my favorite run coaches, Jen Steele. And you're my favorite for multiple reasons. One, because you're cool. And then two, because you are the run coach of one of my very close friends, Marion. Shout out if you're listening to this. I want to shout you out at the beginning of the episode here. But we're here together because we're going to talk about my Marine Corps marathon. I was about to say my Marine Corps therapy. And I'm like, that's not what it is. But
a little bit.
Maybe my Marine Corps marathon experience. And I do not want this conversation to pass without us touching upon your Chicago marathon experience. So hopefully you're okay in talking about it, because I'm sure there's going to be just so much to share from both of our marathon experiences. So how about you introduce yourself to us once again, for those who are listening who may not be familiar with you. Let us know who you are and what you are excited about right now.
I am Jen, like Steph said. I am a run coach, and I am in San Diego. I have two small girls. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old. So I'm on the other side of the girl mom world from Stephanie. And let's see, right now in running, I'm starting training for my first ultra marathon. And 50K.
Okay, wait. What 50K are you doing?
It's called the Avalon 50K. It's on Catalina Island off the coast of like Southern California.
When are you doing that?
The first weekend in January.
Holy shit. Okay. Okay, we're there.
I have a friend who always joked that like if we were ever going to do an ultra, we should just do it right after we ran a marathon, because we already had the base. And then I had a girlfriend ask she was like, I really want to run this for my 40th birthday. Do you want to do it with me? And I was like, okay, I will do the 50K with you. I will not do the 50 miler. I don't know that that's ever going to be in my path, but a 50K, yes. So here we go.
So the reason I'm like, okay, you and I have parallels, right? Because I ran one 50K in, I think it was 2016. It was either 2016 or 2015. I don't remember what year it was, but I had ran the Miami Marathon in January, and I figured this exact same thing. I'm just going to build off of this marathon experience and do a 50K in April. It was April of that year. But I say we're parallel because I am very seriously contemplating running a 50K next year myself. And for my 40th birthday. So that's why I'm like, wait a minute, when and where?
Tell me more.
So I love that. I love that. I love that.
Well, speaking of more parallels, I know that I kind of started this journey back in, I guess, April, because I just offered to interview you on your podcast after you had run London. It was just like felt the calling and offered. And then when you reached out again about a Marine Corps kind of recap, and then I kind of saw how the race went for you. Obviously, we'd been in talks to do this before you ran the race. And I felt so many parallels to how I felt running Chicago, like just the emotions in the race and like processing so many emotions over the course of a race. And all of those things totally seemed in that same parallel line of life.
Yeah, I keep coming back to the idea that marathons are tough. And the morning of the Marine Corps marathon, I journaled, and there's been so much movement in my life in terms of moving from house to house, finally moving back into our house, which we moved back into our house the Tuesday before the marathon. And I got
like 5 days.
Yeah, like
right?
5 days. And I got very little rest that week. I keep coming back, and that's another thing I come back to of, this whole idea of, a very calm taper, and then you have a race. That was out the door for me. There was nothing calm about the taper, because we were moving back into the house. My kids, the week of the marathon, I think I picked them up from school maybe once because I had to be at home, or everyone's schedule was really off. So even last week, the week after the marathon, I picked my girls up from school, and my oldest, the first thing out of her mouth was, "Wow, you picked us up. How does it feel?" And I'm like, "Come on, kid." Like,
Daggers.
yeah, it was pretty rough when she said that. And there's nothing else to say. And and even, oh goodness, last week it was the same thing. I haven't had rest. It's been really, really busy on multiple fronts in my life. And there was, I think it might have been Thursday. This past weekend was the New York City Marathon. I was checking in with my athletes, and I pick my daughter up and I tell her, "Okay, I'm going to drop you off, but then I need to go do a strength and conditioning class. And after that, I have some phone calls." And she goes to me, "When did you get so busy?" And I'm like, "You're not helping with the guilt, the mom guilt I already have of trying to fit, you know, I'm sure you understand where you're trying to fit like 10 days worth of stuff into 3, right? I'm trying to fit everything into a very small time. And it hasn't been, I laugh because if I don't laugh, I cry.
Yeah.
It's been the opposite of what I would have wanted for myself in terms of an ideal going into a race and an ideal coming out of a race. And it's just, it's life. And I know I've been doing my best to kind of keep up with it, but the morning of the race, I journaled. 26.2 is a long time. And it's long, not just in distance. 26.2 miles is very, very, that's a far distance, but it's also long in feeling, because you never know what's going to come up for you when you're out there, right? All the stuff that can come up for you. And it's
Yeah.
hard.
I feel like the more that I run, the more it becomes an outlet for me in that way. And the more often I find myself crying on runs or processing those feelings that I maybe don't want to deal with in regular life on the run. And it sounds like maybe some of that came up too.
Oh, for sure. For sure. It was, I started the run, and I can kind of get into like a little bit of the race day stuff. Um, but I want to start off by saying that Marine Corps is an incredible marathon. It is just such a beautiful course, very, very well put on. I had listened to a podcast leading up to the race with the race director, and the race director's like, "We have lots of bathrooms." So I went to that race fully expecting there to be lots of bathrooms, and it did not disappoint. They had so many bathrooms in the start area and near the corrals, and it was great. And I was really excited about the race because it's a race that there's no cash prizes, and yet they still draw. I think it was maybe 30,000 runners. I believe it's 24,000 that ran the marathon. I forget what the breakdown was, but it was over 20,000
A
people
lot.
that signed up for the marathon. That was a lot. So I went into the race expecting it to be a big race, a big event. I don't think I anticipated how full the race would feel. And you've done, you had Chicago, right? So you know what it feels like to be around runners the whole time. And that was probably the first thing for me that shocked me. I went in with the plan of a 4:30. I thought 4:30, I'm like, 4:30, I think that's going to be challenging, but manageable. Like, that's where I wanted to be. That's the headspace that I thought I could be okay with, a challenging but manageable pace.
I have a question to interrupt you before you go into more. 'Cause I wrote
Yeah.
down as we were before, like, you obviously the moving and all of this stuff happened, and a lot of it was out of your control. Was 4:30 your goal? Like, kind of when you went into the training cycle, you were like, 4:30, that's going to be the thing, or was it something that like changed and evolved in race week? Were you like, this is what I have to give, 4:30 is it? Like, what were your expectations, both in terms of time and just like in general? And then how much was real life? Like,
Okay.
how much did real life throw you? Because I think that's really different, right? You can assume that life is going to be crazy. But then when you're actually living it, sometimes expectations and reality are still not always the same. And sometimes they are, and it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll let everybody into a little secret for how I train. I don't like to train with paces. I do, don't get me wrong, I still have my workouts. And this kind of connects to just my evolution as a runner over the past few years. And I've talked about it before on the podcast that I went through a period when I first started running. I was just curious as to what I could do, right? Like that was purely from the stance of what can my body do? Time didn't matter. And then I saw that my times were improving. And all of a sudden, time became something that was really, really important to me. And then, and I've talked about this, but I had the Chicago Marathon in 2017. It was the worst marathon experience. And after that, I realized I can't tie my sense of worth or sense of progress as a runner to time. And I made a big shift. And I spent probably about 3 years after, like from 2017. So I started working with my coach in 2017, 2018. I believe it was like the beginning of 2018. And from then till about 2021, solid 3 years, we didn't really do a lot of prescribed paces. It was very much so effort because I kind of just had a breakdown when it came to the paces. And her and I had a conversation because at that point, I really wanted to run. I really wanted to qualify for Boston, not run Boston. I wanted to qualify for Boston. I had a whole schedule for myself of how much I should improve each year, all of that. And it was sucking the life out of me. Running became a chore. So I have spent, I would say, up until when I started training for London earlier this year, that's when she started adding more of the time-based things. So, your tempo run, aim for this pace, but even then it would be, here's your pace, or moderately hard effort, or marathon effort, right? Like it was the effort words because my brain just it just crashed. It like a computer circuit, it just crashes sometimes when I see the numbers. So I went into this training cycle with no time in mind. No time in mind, just kind of, I feel good and I'm going to continue to, whatever she prescribes for me, whatever workouts, I'm going to continue to try to show up to do my best. So we had a conversation, her and I had a conversation, I think the Wednesday before the race. And she told me, I think you're whatever 9:15 pace is. So maybe between 4:10 and 4:20. That's what she's like, I think you're in that area. And I said, okay, cool. I don't know if I'm actually in that area. Like I'm sure, I've done the training. So if I look back on my training, I can see where that comes from, given that I've spent months training in the heat, in the summer, in the humidity, and Marine Corps was supposed to be cooler, but still hot. It was something else. So I went into that race with her words of, I think you can be around a 9:15 pace. And for me, knowing the stress of the week, I was like, no, I think I'm closer to 4:30. Like, I think that's where I will be. Again, that challenging, but manageable considering everything else. But I personally don't, I went into the training just blind as to what's possible for me. So that's like, that's me, where I'm like, don't talk to me about paces, because then I just start to overthink. And I'm so terrified of getting back into that headspace where all like, I think it's the disappointment of not meeting the pace, even in workouts, because I would have that too in certain workouts. And that's really what prompted the switch to effort-based wording with my workouts, is that I would get really stressed out and then I would beat myself up over not being able to meet the times, which is for me, doing this as a hobby and doing this as an outlet to have fun was just didn't work out for me. So long-winded answer to tell you, I went in not knowing, and then she told me a pace range, and I thought, no, I think I'm going to be a little lower than that. So that's what I went into that race with.
When did you know that you were going to be moving back into the Gasita the week of the race? Because I know that it was delayed and it was changed and it was not what you thought. And anybody who follows you knows that that was how it went. So when did you know that that was going to be the way it broke down?
So we were initially told, I had given the general contractor the ideal date, August 31st. That was my ideal date because the kids wouldn't be too far into the school year that we would disrupt the school year for them. And so when oh my gosh, so much backstory, y'all, you're going to get it all right now. I'm going to try to be as precise as possible, but we moved out of our house in September of 2022, and we moved into a 9-month rental because at the time that we moved out, they told us, oh, the permits for your house should take 6 to 8 weeks. And then the work on your house should take about 6 to 8 months. So we thought, oh, we applied for our permits in July of 2022. We should be okay. No, we didn't get the permits for the project on our house until March of 2023. And the work did not officially start until April of 2023. And our lease ended in mid-June of 2023. So when that lease ended, we didn't know what to do. The rental market in Miami is incredibly expensive. And we, at the time, made the decision that my in-laws have a house on the west coast of Florida. So the girls and I packed up, moved to the west coast of Florida. My husband moved back in with his parents for the summer so that we could save money, thinking that, oh, August 31st, right? Like, even if we come back mid-August, it's 2 weeks. We can figure 2 weeks out. August came around and they told us, it's not going to happen. Like September 15th. So we move into an Airbnb. And now that I was back in Miami, I was coming to the house almost daily to see the work that's happening, how it's coming up. And they had still said September 15th. We're coming to the house and we're seeing there's too much stuff to do. There's no way it's going to be ready by September 15th. And we weren't notified that we knew that it wasn't going to be available. So we did what we could to extend the Airbnb, but we couldn't. The Airbnb someone else had rented it. So we had to move somewhere else. And we weren't officially notified until September 11th that September 15th wasn't going to work out for us. And at that September 11th date, we were told we need another 30 days. So we're like, okay, October 15th, which for me, I'm like, all right, October 15th is pushing it. It's pushing it, but I think it's manageable. It's 2 weeks before the race. Like, I think we'll be okay. And
as you're talking this through, all I can think is not only is this happening, which is super stressful, but this is also happening in peak training. Like, these are your highest mileage weeks. So like we talk all the time, you and I have talked about this so much, like how all the things outside of running impact running, like to a level beyond what we ever really attribute, I think, most of the time. And like the fact that you could even show up for long runs and like do a 20-mile run in the middle of all of this is insanely impressive. Like, my brain hurts thinking about it.
Yeah, I don't know how I did it. There was definitely a long run. I think it was I believe it was one of my 20-milers because I did 2 20-milers this training cycle. And I'm almost positive it was one of them. I did it, came home, packed, because from mid-August to us moving back into our house, we had to move 3 times into 3 different Airbnbs because each Airbnb kept getting rented out. So we couldn't extend the stay in any of them, which was really frustrating. But there was one that it was a 20 miler and it ran the 20 miles, came home to pack. That night, I took my daughter to a concert. And then the next day, we moved from one Airbnb to another. I don't even know how I did it. I don't know. Because now that I'm looking back, I'm like, oh, that was a lot. Like, oh yeah, no wonder you were tired. No wonder you were tired. So we had hoped October 15th. And in the lead up to October 15th, again, we're kind of seeing like there's things in the house. We had a last minute change to the flooring because the person who did the flooring, there were just mistakes that were done that we would not accept and would be really hard to repair once our stuff was moved in. And at that point, they're like, all right, then we need 1 more week. And I said, okay, 1 more week. I think we can kind of do 1 more week. And then there was even more delays. So instead of it being ideally, it would have been like the Saturday, so the weekend before the marathon, there was just another delay that pushed us back 2 days. And we were supposed to move the Monday before the marathon. And that Monday morning, I get a text message from the movers. I'm sick. Can we reschedule to tomorrow? And I thought I was going to lose my mind because I'm like, this is Tuesday, right? Like this is my race week. So I laugh now again, because if not, I'm going to cry. I'll probably cry later, but it's fine. So, so the Tuesday that I get that text message at 7:15 a.m. Monday morning when we had agreed to meet at 9:30. And I said, all right, how can I make lemonade? That was pretty much it. Like, here's another situation that's outside of my control because I'm reliant on other people. So I did what I could do that day, which was move what I could move. I was at the house. I just trying to ask everyone questions,
What you should do the week of your taper is move a bunch of boxes and whatever you can into a new house.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And I even told myself, Steph, like, you've got to take it easy. You've got to, make sure you're eating, make sure you're drinking. I do not recommend anything that I did that week to anybody, because I can tell you that I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I was not taking care of myself because I was so determined to do what I could to get my family settled into our house, even if it was for 2 days before my husband and I left for the race. I was so determined to do that. So Tuesday comes around, the movers come, and they are wonderful. I mean, they did the move in like 5 hours, but if anyone's moved, you know that unpacking boxes and figuring it out takes even longer. So I did what I could to unpack, and I had to tell myself, you gotta stop, you gotta stop, you gotta stop. But again, don't recommend this to anybody. Definitely don't recommend it to anybody. But I couldn't stop. And I would just tell myself, 1 more box, 1 more box. I think I got, and so we moved in Tuesday, and I believe by Thursday, I had probably unpacked about 40% of the boxes. And I was not sleeping well, which I don't think I would have been able to sleep well anyways. It's race week. Plus, we just moved back into our house. Plus, there's still, even now, as we're recording this, like, there's still stuff pending with, I mean, here you can see behind me, I don't have closet doors. It's something like that. There's still things that are pending that really require me to be around for them. And yeah, so the week of the race was one of those of lots of squatting because I was picking up boxes. Lots of squatting, very, very, I would say, not restful sleep because I was so stressed out. And if you can gather, or if you followed along on Instagram, it really was, it was a battle to get back into the house. Um, and I try really, really hard to be respectful of the people who have done the work in the house or who have helped us. And it's been really challenging. It has been a year since September, probably, oh, at this point it's November, but I'd say November of last year is when things really started to get intense with the house stuff. And all we've ever wanted and all I've ever wanted is for people to communicate with me and to talk to me and just tell me what's going on. And that's been the biggest struggle with this house project is, oh, let me silence my notifications here. Um, that's honestly been the biggest struggle. And that was something that I didn't realize how much I had to advocate for my family and advocate for us getting back into the house. Like that was very, very stressful. So that's all like part of what I was going into this race of, like, I'm relieved to be home, but at the same time, it's a whole, and I think I even told myself that of coming back into the house or getting back into the house, it's going to be its own marathon of unpacking, of feeling settled, of feeling like we're back home.
When did you leave for the race?
Friday.
Okay.
So,
and the race was Saturday or Sunday?
Sunday.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, to give everyone the good timeline, right? So we moved in Tuesday, and Tuesday was the first night that we actually spent in the house. Then we left, my husband and I left Friday. Friday, we got there early. We went to Expo. Saturday, we went to Mount Vernon, which is we did that during the day for a couple of hours. It wasn't too bad. Rested. Sunday was the race. And then Monday, we went to Old Town Alexandria in the morning, and then we flew back. So it was a quick little weekend getaway.
Did it feel like Friday and Saturday gave you any chance to settle in a little bit, or did you feel like really anxious having left the chaos with it not really being resolved? I could see it going either way.
Yeah, I actually felt really calm, and I felt grateful that I had to travel for a race, because if not, if I would have done a race in Miami or in like somewhere in Florida that I had to drive to, I wouldn't have been able to disconnect. There was something about being somewhere totally different and also not having to be a mom for the weekend that allowed me to really shut off and enjoy. And I will say I made up for everything I didn't eat during the week. I made up for it. I had like 2 dinners on Friday, 2 dinners on Saturday. I was walking around with my graham crackers everywhere I went. So I definitely made up for it. But that was something I had told myself, that just getting there is going to feel like a celebration. Because Tuesday is really pushing it. Tuesday, when we leave on Friday, that was definitely pushing the timeline there. And it was, I never want to do it again. That's just it. I never want to do it again.
Yeah, understandably so, especially after moving is hard. And then after your experience, it makes it even harder.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
So you make it there, which is, like you said, is a celebration. I mean, it's always a celebration to make it to the start line, any start line, but I think especially a marathon, because you put so much into it, so much happens beforehand, that if you're not doing all of the things, you're not going to make it to the start line. So you obviously were doing what you could in terms of training to get to the start line, regardless of all of the extra stress on your life. So you had started to kind of go, you went to the expo, you hung out, you kind of went in, like started. So now take us there. There's lots of bathrooms, which is always a good thing pre-race. Tell us about your morning of routine. You said you journaled. Do you
Yeah.
coffee? What do you drink? What do you eat? What's your pre-race
So
breakfast?
I'll
All the good.
I'll tell you all that. Um, so start time for Marine Corps is 7:55 ish. So Marine Corps is pretty unique in that again, it has a very large field, but they essentially do a rolling start. So once 7:55 goes off, that time and the cannons, everyone goes off. They Let me go back. So morning of, the night before, I actually try to prep what I can the night before. So all my clothes was out, all my gear, all my gels, I had them in a plastic bag and the gear check bag. Like I prepped everything the night before. I prepped oatmeal for myself. I really like the Kodiak oatmeal. There's like a maple whatever flavor. And I prepped that the night before, put it in the fridge because I don't like hot oatmeal, but I also I like room temperature. I don't know. I like room temperature. I don't like it hot. I don't like cold. So I prepped it the night before so I could pull it out in the morning. But I had that at probably 5:15 in the morning. I ate what I could, not the whole thing. 'Cause at that point, it was just still too early for me. So I ate what I could. And my husband dropped me off. They have a runner drop off. So he dropped me off there at 6:30, more or less. From that runner drop off to where the start area is, I don't know how long it was exactly, but I was told that you will walk anywhere between 1 to 2 miles to get to the start line. So it was definitely a pretty long walk. And on the way, I saw a bathroom and I'm like, I'm going to stop at the bathroom. So while I'm waiting for the bathroom, I had usually an hour before I start running, I drink Vega has an energizer drink. So it's like, I don't drink coffee, but that has caffeine in it. I guess that's my coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
So I had that in the morning. So I had my oatmeal around 5:15. Then about 7 a.m., I had the Vega Energizer. Then between 7 a.m. and starting the race, I'm munching on my graham crackers. Love my graham crackers. And that's kind of my pre-race, pre-morning, at least pre-race routine when it comes to eating stuff. Normally, I just do Vega and my graham crackers for breakfast, but because it's a race, I know I need more carbs and I need more energy. I had the oatmeal. So again, Marine Corps is a little bit unique with that rolling start of the corral. So you walk to where the corrals are, where there's more bathrooms, and you line up. It's self-selected, 100% self-selected, the different pace groups. So they'll have the big balloons or what the inflatables that'll say the time, expected finish time, 4:15 to 4:30, 4:31 to 4:45, or whatever the case is. There's pace groups for all of that. So I told myself, I had even journaled about this in the morning where I said, the goal of the day is to find that 4:30 pace group and just hold on. Like that was my
You
goal.
like running with the pace group?
You know, I've only successfully done it once. And I think we've had this talk about pace groups, right? Of like how they can sometimes be good and sometimes not. I've only successfully ran with a pace group once, and it was, I think, back in 2014. I mean, it's been a long time.
But your
And
plan was to hang on with the pace group for this race.
yeah, that was the plan. I'm like, let me find the 4:30 pace group. Let me try to hang on with them. Even if I'm not like talking to the pacers, let me at least kind of be in the vicinity. Because usually at these big races, the pace groups are like mobs. Like it is a big group of people. So I thought 4:30, let me try to find them. Let me go. I was in position. I was around them. Like the person with holding the stick for 4:30 might have been like 5 people ahead of me. Once the race started, just gaps, and also slower moving people were there. And I knew that this particular course, that the first 3 to 5 miles were rolling hills. So that was my intention for that, was to not expend energy trying to weave around people. That was part of also why I wanted the 4:30 pace group, because I'm like, let me just stick with them be with that group as we navigate the ups, the downs, and whatever of that particular area. But
for anybody that's not familiar with the topography of Miami, it's very flat.
It's so flat.
Insanely flat. So rolling hills, where some of us are like, oh yeah, rolling hills, like that's normal. It's not what Stephanie gets to practice on all the time. So like rollers are a big deal.
It's for me, it's a big freaking deal. And
it's a conversation Marion and I have all the time.
Yeah, there was definitely I don't even know what point. I mean, it got to the point where I was cursing in Spanish, where I was like, another hill? Like, it's not just cursing in English. Once you've got me cursing in Spanish, we're reaching a whole different level of just what the heck is going on this. And so again, I knew that those first few miles would be rolling hills, and I really wanted to be with the 4:30 pace group, but it just opened up in such a way that I didn't expect when the race started. And again, people self-select where they want to be. And it's not to knock people's race strategy at all. Y'all do what you're going to do, but it's definitely something to say about, people who are moving slower stay to the right of the course. People who are moving faster go to the left, versus just taking up the entire course. So again, I made a decision pretty early on. I made a decision there. As soon as I saw 4:30 go away and I didn't want to weave around people, I was like, all right, so we're just going to tuck in here and we're going to do what we can to stay steady. That's a big mantra of mine lately, is just stay steady. Wherever you are, just stay steady. And I kept waiting for the course to open up. It never opened up. I don't know. Even in the parts where I thought, hey, it has to finally open up here, it didn't, because there are different parts of the course where you are sharing the road with the athletes that are further along. So there was, I think, between miles 6 and 9, you do a big loop, but you're running in one direction and everybody's running in the other. So there was I think mile 20, when you're running the big bridge, that's when it opened up. And at that point you're like, we're 20 miles in, that's a different ball game here. So it was very much so just tuck it in and try to hold course as we're moving forward. And I felt good. I don't know if you have this in your races, but for me, it's usually by mile 5 is where I can tell what kind of day it's going to be. Whether it's going to be a strong day, whether it's going to be a day where I'm fighting, whether it's going to be a day where I'm struggling or I'm okay. But I passed that 5-mile mark and I thought, all right, I got the rollers. We're good. I'm good. I'm feeling really steady. I found different people to kind of like, try to draft off of, or try to pass, whatever, the games that you kind of play with yourself.
Like play with. Yeah.
Yeah. Games you kind of play with yourself. And then, I'd say mile 9 is where I was in. I'm like, I'm not feeling great. Like, I don't know why I'm not feeling great, but I'm not feeling great. But at that point I saw
all those things we've already talked about.
Yeah, that's all the tiredness. I feel like there was even a point where I was like, I'm tired. Like, I'm tired. And around mile 9.75, I saw Coach Christy Zook. She talked about gear on season 3 of the podcast. And I was so excited to see her and to catch her. And I went up to her and I'm like, can I hug you? And she's like, of course. I'm like, but I'm sweating. Oh, it's so silly how us runners are like, but I'm sweating. It's like, we don't care. We want the hug. Like,
was she on the sidelines, like cheering?
Was on the sidelines cheering. Yeah. So then I went up to her and I'm like, it's really hard. And she's like, it's hot. Like, you're doing great. Just keep going. She gave me a pep talk and I said, okay, I can totally, like, I'm just going to keep going. And then mile 10 comes around, and part of what I didn't share is that my dog died in September of all this. So in the midst of the move, and that was one of the more challenging things. It's the first death that my children have experienced. And remember how I said August 31st, September 15th were potential move-in dates? That was something that really hit hard of, oh, we're going to come back to our house, but we're not going to come back with her. And that was something that just, again, it hit the family really hard. So mile 10 comes around, and I'm going to probably slow down my speech now because the emotions are there and I can feel them. And I feel like sobbing. You know, those cries that come from like deep within you. I feel like sobbing. I can't catch my breath, and I just want to stop. I want to stop and I want to cry. But I also don't want people to worry about me while I'm out on the course. Like, I don't want to cause a scene, you know, like I don't want medics coming to me and asking if I'm okay. It's just so, the mind is amazing. And I just couldn't stop thinking about her. Could not stop thinking about her. And I was like, what the fuck, man? Like, why is this happening now? What's going on? Why is this the thought that I'm having? And just kept like, it was like replaying. I could not stop the thought and I couldn't catch my breath. And I told myself, you just got to keep moving forward, like just one foot in front of the other. And I've always said that I never doubt my ability to finish a marathon. What I doubt is mentally what it's going to take me. Like I have doubts over my mental strength. And this was the first marathon where I genuinely thought I wasn't going to be able to finish because the emotion was so raw and so strong. And so I'm big in my grief. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Marine Corps Marathon, they have what's called the Blue Mile, and it's between miles 12 and 13. And it is a mile lined with the faces of fallen soldiers. And oh,
The timing of that really in the race, when the moment you were having was just
oh my
not
God,
a
so many, so much. So I'm like running, and that's just
already having a moment.
I'm already big in my grief, right? Like I'm deep in my grief. I just want to cry. And again, it's not just like sniffling, crying, and like, oh, no. This was like, I felt like my tears were suffocating me. Like I felt that emotion was suffocating. And so I get to this mile and I tell myself, all right, just to focus on the faces, right? Like, and I did. I was on the right side, and this is a very narrow part of the course as well. Like maybe you can be 4 people in a line. Like it is incredibly narrow.
Like a lane.
Yeah, it is a lane. Exactly. But I told myself, I'm just going to focus on each face, like each face, and just really honor what that mile is. So I make it through there, and I'm like, okay, we've got to, keep things in perspective here. Like it's my dog versus a human being. Like,
Did that help you? Did that help pull you out to like switch perspective
it did.
a little bit? Okay.
It did for a little bit. And then I was done in there and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so grief. And then I just started thinking how powerful of an emotion grief is, how our society doesn't know how to process grief or like create the space for it or just allow it to exist. And how there is no timeline for grief. You don't know when it's going to hit you. You don't know when it's going to come up. It was pretty rough. And then thankfully at some point in all of that, my bladder started talking. So then I'm like, all right, I need to focus on finding a bathroom. Like, where's the bathroom? I need to pee. And I came up with like a song that I was singing out loud to myself of where's the bathroom? I've got to go pee. I got to pee. Like that's what I sang for about a mile. And I made it to mile 16, went to a bathroom, and I come out of the bathroom, and I'd say not even 50 feet from where the bathroom was, there was a man on the ground getting chest compressions. And I said, oh, that's kind of serious, right? Like it's not just someone passed out because they're hot. There's someone getting chest compressions. mile 16 of I don't even know the orientation, but again, this is another area where you are running on one side and then the runners are on the other side. So both ends of this road
An
are
out and back section.
Yeah, an out and back section. Thank you. So I come out, it's mile 16, and we're getting to the loop, and all the EMS trucks come, and I come back and I see even more people working on this guy. The, ambulance is there. I mean, and I'm thinking, well, isn't this a day for grief? Because then I start thinking about, I hope someone's contacted. I hope he filled out his bib. That was my thought I hoped he filled out his bib with his emergency contact so that people know who to contact, because he's not going to continue on the race, right? Like and they did CPR on him from where I first came out to where I looped back. It had to have been at least 3 minutes of them doing chest compressions on him. So then that snapped me out of my grief in a way, because I thought, again, there's so many different ways to grieve and to feel everything. So I told myself, I'm going to finish this race in that person's honor. I hope he made it. I don't know if he did, but if you're listening to this and you know who that is, let me know. Because I've definitely Googled, I've tried to find out. I'm like, did anyone die? Like, what happened at this race? Yeah. Who was this person? Because that's, again, like, I'm already in this really bad headspace of grief and death, which is not where you want to be in a marathon. Listen, y'all, you do not want to be in that headspace when you're running a marathon. And seeing that person on the ground, again, I'm thinking, hopefully he filled out the emergency contact. I'm thinking about, are there family and friends waiting for this person on the course and then he doesn't make it? Like, what's going on? So I was like, okay, you need to get out of whatever pity party you have going on in your head. And you need to finish this race for him. Hopefully he's okay. And if you know who this person is and you're listening, let me know, because I've definitely been checking. I check daily and I don't even know what the hell I should be checking for, but I'm like, Marine Corps death, Marine Corps cardiac arrest, Marine Corps. And I'm like, but would they even report it as a Marine Corps death if the person died in the hospital? Like, how does that, like, again, the logistics of all of that this is the stuff that I've been thinking about in my post-race recovery of, do they only count it as a death if it happens on the course, or does it have to be in the hospital? Like, who thinks about this stuff? So
I mean, everybody, we all have these like spiraling thoughts.
Oh, I spiraled. And so then I continue to run, and I feel like the mile 20 is when you run that bridge, which is a very long bridge, which at that point, that I didn't even feel it. It felt really easy to me compared to everything else that I did and everything else I experienced. I'm like, what? I'm not worried about that. Get to mile 20, which was the hardest part because there was absolutely no tree coverage. And at that point, the sun had come out. Mile 20, I get to mile 22 and there's a fireball tent giving shots. And I'm like, well, this day's already been shit. So like, might as well have a shot. Like, we're good. So I have a shot of fireball, and my plan.
I applaud you, because I remember passing the woman holding Jello shots at about the same point at the Chicago Marathon and thinking, oh my God, if I tried to take that right now, I don't know what would happen, but it's not going to be pretty. Like, I wonder if anybody's going to take it.
Listen, I can
say I know somebody who has.
Now you can say she did it. And I think at mile 21, I probably texted my husband it was either mile 21 or 22. I just figured, I'll text him the last, like, each mile just so he knows where I'm at. And I texted him and he said, I'm at Chipotle. And I'm like, cool, I don't know where that is, but all right. But I realized after mile 22 that we were coming into an area with shops and restaurants. And I thought, oh, I wonder if it's in this area. So I'm running and I'm like, where is he? Like, where? I think this is the area. I spot him and I take it as a perfect opportunity to walk. Cause I'm like, oh, let me just, stroll with my husband. And he's like, you look really good. You look like you've got energy. And I'm like, this man doesn't know I just took a shot of Fireball. Like everything's great right now. So then, so I walk that little block with him. I keep going. And again, so mile 16, I see this person and I tell myself, I'm going to finish in their honor. Like I'm going to finish this race that this person probably trained months for, thought he was in great physical shape to do, right? All of us who train for marathons and we make it to that start line, we think we're in great physical shape, or at least as great physically as we can be. We think we're ready to do it. So I had decided that at some point between miles 20 and 23 that I was going to just run the last 5K as fast as I could. And I told myself, I'm like, I'm going to run it as fast as I can. And just,
I'm sure the Fireball helped with that decision.
Oh, it totally helped. And I thought I was going to pee on myself. Honestly, like you said, you really don't know what's going to happen. Like, are you going to be okay? Are you not going to be okay? And so I was like, maybe I'll pee myself, maybe not, but we'll see. And so I told myself, I want that last 5K to almost be like a redemption of the rest of the race, in its own way. Making
if
that
nothing else, at least you finished really strong.
Exactly.
I totally understand that. Yeah.
Exactly. So I started to pick up the pace because I'm like, I know I'm almost done. I can totally just crank out what I can for this last 10K. And in that last 10K, last 5K, in that I saw another coach, Danielle Hurt, and I almost cried. And I'm like, I can't stop thinking about my dead dog. She's like, it's hot. And I'm like, no, it's my dead dog. Like, it's not even the weather. It's not even the course. It's my dead dog. And which was great because then she said, everyone, that's the cookie runner. And in her saying that there was someone else, another runner on the course. And she's like, hey, and I'm like, oh, so it was just such a beautiful little final stretch where I saw people and I knew that Marine Corps finishes on a climb. The finish line, you have to climb up to it. And even then I saw that and I was like, fuck it. Like that really was my, sorry y'all for cursing. But at that point, I'm like, fuck it. Like we've made it. If we're going to push hard, we're going to push hard here and we're going to finish strong. And
if you don't think that at mile 26 of a marathon, there's something wrong with you. Yes. Like, I think that's just the general, you hit mile 26 and you're like, yeah,
that's it.
Let's go.
Finish line is right there. And I could see it, right? I could see where mile 26, and then you're climbing up and going around, right? It's not you're climbing up to the finish line. It's you're climbing and then turning into the finish line. And I crossed the finish line and it was emotional, but in a different way, of marathons are such journeys. And that one really felt like a deeply profound lesson in grief and in surviving grief. And I kept thinking about just how suffocating it felt and how I felt like I was going to drown in my own tears. So to finish, I didn't even care. And that was kind of the post that I shared that day of like, your times don't matter if you never even make it. Your times don't matter if you don't make it to the start line. If you don't make it to the finish line, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you don't even get the chance to show up. And that's what I walked away from that race with that of who cares? Like for me, it was just like, who, like if you can survive 26.2 miles in your head, that's an accomplishment in and of itself.
Well, and it's almost more impressive the longer it takes you, right? Like, because you're in your head for so much longer. Like, I've had an almost 7-hour marathon and I've had a 4.5-hour marathon. And the 7-hour marathon's a lot harder because you're stuck in your head trying to convince yourself to keep doing this thing for so much longer. Like, that's a really long time to convince yourself to keep doing this thing that feels really, really hard and that is really, really hard. Right? Like, and that's what you did for a very long time, was to convince yourself to keep doing the thing that was really, really hard.
Yeah, it, again, like in the post race, I've tried to reflect. I've tried to reflect. Like I wrote a blog post and I'm like, okay, this is the start of it. But you know, we came back to Miami, and coming back to Miami meant obviously diving back into motherhood, diving back into the unfinished business of my house and different issues that have popped up. So it's not even like I came back and I got a massage or I took it easy. No, I came back very much into a busy life. And the processing has been one of, we're not guaranteed anything. And it feels almost morbid to have that thought. And I've always thought that, right? Of the marathon owes us nothing. The marathon is a beast. The marathon, again, it is a long time. It's a long time for everything to go right. And it's a long time for everything to go wrong, right? So much can happen in a race. And I think of, if I had to break down Marine Corps into like chunks, it's like, okay, the first 9 miles were solid. And then I kind of like got a little like, which I think maybe that was it. That moment of between miles 9 and 10 of feeling like tired or not my best, that created an opening for the grief to come out, where it's like, oh, okay, so you're finally ready to face all the stuff that you haven't faced. And
well, it sounds like you gave yourself space. Like that was the first time you had space. And it's like, when life is happening in the way that it happened, it's so hard to force yourself to sit and have space, especially as a mom, and you're trying to make sure your kids are okay with processing their feelings, right? Because it's their first time dealing with it, and making sure they're doing it. And the first time you gave yourself white space to process just happened to be a marathon.
yeah, and I mean, when we think about it too, right? I mean, afterwards I realized, oh, my dog she was the easiest thing that my mind could latch onto, right? Like the most concrete and the safest thing that my mind could latch onto was her.
Yeah.
And she just represented all the grief of everything. And there was, I believe it was maybe 2 weeks before we finally moved into the house, I had asked my youngest daughter, how are you doing with all these moves? And she said, oh, in the beginning it was fun. And now it's not, because she's noticed that I have less patience. And that really hurt. And it was a truth. And I could recognize it because I would say the month before we moved in, my husband and I were so incredibly stressed because we didn't know what else we could do to make it possible for us to move into the house. Because again, we were reliant on other people to communicate with us, and communication wasn't always the greatest. And so him and I were just incredibly stressed. I mean, there was one of the moves, I didn't book an Airbnb until 8:30 p.m. the night before we moved into the Airbnb. Like that last move, that last Airbnb to Airbnb move was that. It was a 12-hour, because we didn't know until Friday morning that moving into our house was definitely not going to be possible. So the timeline of things was very, very challenging throughout it. And I think during the race, you're right. That was that time of here, my body is doing something. It's very rhythmic. It's very automatic, this movement. And now my brain
trained it to do it for thousands of miles over a decade and a half or whatever, like
yeah.
it's a safe place, especially because you weren't pushing the pace. Like, it was a safe place for your body to be. And then.
Yeah, which sucks. I mean, it's like, I try, it's truly, when I think about it and I think about all the stress and the transition and the changes, I'm grateful that I was able to do it. And I'm not even mad about how it turned out. I finished, it was 5:04. So, a solid 34 minutes off of what I thought, and that translates to over a minute slower per mile than what I thought I could. Again, challenging but manageable. That was the pace that I was aiming for. Challenging but manageable. But when you're in those race conditions, challenging but manageable or hard or whatever, it can change. And in those miles where it was just a loop of thoughts about my dead dog. And in those miles, it was like, fuck the pace. Just keep it moving forward. Pace does not matter. It's not important.
Forward is a pace.
Forward is a pace. Forward is a pace. Forward is movement. And that was the goal. And I never want to experience that again. I don't know what I need to do, but that was kind of what I journaled about after the race. And that, we train to prepare our minds and our bodies to handle the heat, right? To handle a day that does not go our way because of temperature, or because of our stomach, or because of fueling, or because of an injury, or an injury we're nursing, or whatever the case is. My marathon experience was something I couldn't have anticipated at all. Like, there is no way to prepare for that. And that's where I find that giving myself grace comes into play. I still finished, and that's something to be incredibly proud of. And 26.2 miles is 26.2 miles, regardless of how fast I got there.
Yeah, it's another marathon.
Yeah, it is another marathon. I still can't believe I did it. I mean,
I can't believe you did it in the midst of all of the things. I don't know that I would have made it to the start line. I think I probably would have stopped.
yeah, I think I had, and that was something that I had reflected on. I had talked to one of my run coaching clients, and we had a big discussion at some point in her training about this not being the ideal time for her to do the training that she was doing. And my question was like, when is the ideal time, right? If life is going to happen, there truly is no ideal time, because we can't predict what life is going to happen within all of that. And when I decided to do Marine Corps back in May or whatever it was earlier this year, I didn't anticipate any of this, right? I thought, hey, Marine Corps, we'll figure it out, for the summer.
You were going to move in over a month before you did.
Yeah. Yeah. All of it. Right. Like, I was hopeful that August 31st, somewhere between August 31st to September 15th, we'd be moving into our house. I couldn't have anticipated that it was going to be, 5 days before the marathon is when I moved into the house. And I couldn't have anticipated moving 5 different times in that from May to October time period, 5 moves. Couldn't have anticipated that either. And yet I still, for me, running is something that does ground me, right? Like running is, and I think that's part of what made it easy to show up for the running, where there's so much chaos in my life, but running is the one thing that's constant. Or running is the one thing that my family members respect as my time of, oh, Saturday you're running, that's non-negotiable. Like, that's your time. We know you're going to go to bed early on Friday. Like, that's the one, I think the one thing that in the midst of everything changing and shifting, it remains the same. So it was easy to stick to that.
Mm-hmm. I totally get that. That was when I got really consistent with running during 2020. It was for a very same reason, where a lot of people ran less. I ran more because Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday morning, I got a couple hours. My husband would not work until 8 a.m. and I would go for a run. What else were we allowed to do? Nothing. We could go outside though. So I would go run. I didn't have anything else to do.
Yeah.
But very similar like reason, right? It was like the thing.
Yeah. It's it held me down. It held me down when everything else was chaotic. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a great race. I don't think I'll ever be able to do it again though. I feel like that is an experience that I would be so I'd be worried about being triggered on that course again of the feelings.
Yeah. There's lots of other races.
Yeah. So how was your Chicago experience?
Was not what I wanted. I trained really hard for it, and I thought I was gonna like a big time goal. I really thought between 4 and 4:10 was like incredibly, like you said, I thought it was incredibly doable, and it would have been a really big PR for me. Like I saw it, which I am not usually like the person that visualizes the goal and does the thing. I'm like very cautious to say. I was like, no, my training kicked ass. Like I'm fit. Like I got this. And then I got bronchitis 2 weeks before the marathon. And yeah, I finished antibiotics 5 days before the marathon. And marathon day came. First like 9 miles, I was like, all right, this is good. And then my stomach was like, that's what you thought till you killed all that good bacteria, and good luck. Now you got to go run 17 more miles. So it was definitely a lesson in, like, I wrote a big post about it after, finding the and in the race. Like I was not what I wanted, and I was able to turn around and like, I think I spent most of the race in between tears, not like the sobbing tears, but like gentle tears.
Gentle tears.
Yeah. like they never took my breath away. Like it's not what I wanted. And this race is still really amazing. I know that you have a soft spot for Chicago also. Yeah, it was just a lot of like, and like, I'm really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful my husband and my kids came, and it really sucks when you train really hard for something and think it's going to happen and it doesn't. And the marathon is always really hard. And I know that there's a lot more there fitness wise and mental toughness wise. It was a lot of like juggling that and those feelings. And like you said, you were still collecting thoughts. It probably took a week and a half before I could like come to some sort of cohesive thought. And my race wasn't as traumatic as yours was. And it still took like a week and a half to like put my thoughts into feelings. Like we went out to dinner afterwards, my husband and my girls and I, and my girls were playing. And my husband asked a question about the race, and I like started crying, trying to talk to him, sitting there at dinner. And I was like, okay, this is not what I want my girls to think the marathon is. Like afterwards, I have to pull it together. but like, I'm really frustrated. And then I was like texting my coach that night, like so frustrated. So it just came in waves of like being really grateful and then being really frustrated and being really grateful and like loving the experience and then being really frustrated and disappointed. So yeah, lots of feelings.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think it really came to light for me on, I'd say over the past few months of we're allowed to experience both, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you did that post on Instagram on the and that's definitely the headspace I've been in, particularly since, since all this housing stuff has been going on. I mean, I even had a point where I'm like, do I suffer from toxic gratitude? Because I'm leaning heavy into my gratitude. Like I had a whole therapy session on that. I'm like, does that exist? Is it like toxic positivity? Am I gaslighting myself with gratitude? Like that was a lot of the stuff that I was experiencing. And it's because of the andness of it all, because both things can be true. You can be
Yes.
both frustrated and grateful. And I think my biggest struggle was allowing space for both to coexist and finding people who allowed me to exist in both. And that was something that, and I shared a lot about the house stuff on Instagram, and I did not hide some of my frustrations in the last few weeks before we moved in. And it was really interesting to see the reaction I got, where I got a lot of just hugs and love. And I'm like, thanks, the support. But then I also I got some of just telling me to be grateful. And I'm like, I don't think you know who I am, because I'm an incredibly grateful person. And gratitude is very, very high up on my values. And it's not that I'm not grateful, it's that I'm also angry and I'm also frustrated and I'm also disappointed. And all of that can exist. And I think,
I was going to say, you're allowed to be both.
yeah, and it can all exist. And I think, I feel like if you've ran a marathon, you can understand how much of your heart goes into training. It's not just physically what you're doing with your body, but your heart. I mean, you are giving so much of your time, of your energy, you're sacrificing, I love the people who are like, I don't like to strength train, but I'm marathon training, so I'm going to do the strength training, right? Like we are changing ourselves in order to make the goal of running a marathon possible. And yet we hope, right? Like we hope for race day to come together, even though we know it's not a guarantee, right? Like we know it's not a guarantee, but the hope is so strong that when it does start to fall apart, we start to fall apart, right? Like our hearts kind of fall apart with it.
Oh yeah. It
And
breaks a little bit and you have to figure out in real time how to put it back together because you have to get to the end.
yeah. And hopefully, right? Like you're hoping like, oh, maybe it's like for you, it's like mile 9, right? Like you still got 17 miles to go. It's not like that breaking point happened at mile 20 and you just have to convince yourself for a 10K. It's happening very, very early on in the race. And I think it's hard to keep coming back to it. And yet we do, right? Like that's,
Well, we keep coming back to it because it's the hope
yeah.
that like we're going to figure out the thing and the next one's going to be better.
So what were
Like,
your biggest takeaways from Chicago?
I mean, I think that it's okay for it to be both. Like, it's okay to have loved so much of it and be really frustrated. Like, and sitting in that was really hard for me for a little bit. to know like it wasn't what I wanted. And it still was like the most fun ever. And that both things are there and they can both be true. And the next one might not go better, but like, why not try and show up? Like, because the alternative is to not, right? Like,
Hold on, I need my charger. Special appearance, special appearance by my little Santa's helper there. How do you think that's going to change you as a coach?
know if it will very much. I think I am a lot harder on myself as a runner than I am for the athletes that I coach. I think that I am really good at holding space for my athletes in a way that I maybe am not for myself.
Yeah.
As most coaches ever, or any coach, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean,
sport, you know, I feel a lot of us are very type A and pretty hard on ourselves. And there's a reason we don't coach ourselves most of the time, right?
no, I can't. I mean, and that's something that I didn't even mention that. So Marine Corps has, they're called the gauntlets, right? So it's mile 17 and mile 20. There's time limits. Like you have to reach those by a certain time. Otherwise, you get taken off the course. And I knew what those times were because I had done a master class beforehand. So I knew as long as I reach mile 17 by, so race starts at 7:55 a.m. And I think most people have to reach mile 17 by like 12:39, something like that. Like if
What's the cutoff for the course? Is it 6.5?
I think so. I think it's either 6.5 or 7, but they have those cutoffs of if you don't reach mile 17 by this time.
Yeah. So it's probably like a 3:45 pace. It's right around there.
Yeah. So
or 13:45 pace, sorry. 13:45 per mile.
Like, I got you. So I didn't even know that they had shut down those parts 30 minutes early. So so there are people, and I'm surprised we haven't seen more of it on Instagram or on any of the media platforms. They actually closed the gauntlets 30 minutes earlier and diverted runners to the finish.
The weather, right?
Because of the heat and the humidity, and they determined that it just wasn't safe to have people out there. So I had no clue any of this was going on. I just knew, hey, as long as I'm by mile 17 at this time, by mile 20 at this time, I'm okay. Like that really was, those were the only time things on the course that I was aware of. And it wasn't until afterwards, because I had my athletes tracking me at the marathon, and they're like, did you make it? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like I had no clue what was going on. And that's also just an interesting thing too about being a coach, is having your athletes track you and understanding that. I think for me, part of Marine Corps was like just this reminder of my own humanness, of I'm figuring it out, and that my athletes are going to see that I'm figuring it out for myself, and that there's different things. And I know it sounds, I feel like I sound so callous when I say like I just couldn't stop thinking about my dead dogs. That's really what I tell people. They're like, what happened? I'm like, my dead dog. Like that is just it. Because there is no I don't know how else to define it. But it is so interesting, that thought of giving your athletes more grace than you give yourself, and just the humanness of it, of wanting something so bad. And then also knowing that like we learn from our experiences, and we also in a way have to model that for the people who we do coach.
Yeah. Well, and like showing that we're processing bad races the same way that they process bad races, and hoping that the connection piece is there, right? It's been interesting because I did, think I was going to have this big goal. And then I've talked to a couple people, or like new athletes have come And they asked the question, like in the last 2 weeks, I've talked to 2 people on like PRs and like, what's your marathon PR? And because, they have a goal to run a marathon, and it's like, does my marathon PR really matter? Do you want to hear about my athletes' PRs? But I can feel it. It's like that, the defense comes up. That's like, well, yeah, I didn't get there and I really wanted to. And that's it. But like, I know I can coach people to run a heck of a lot faster than that. So like, let me brag on them real quick.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the challenging part about being in a sport that can be very metric driven, in terms of, I'm in this space as an athlete and then as a coach too, where I'm like, okay, so we're going to set the time goal, but like, what are the other things? Like, what are the feeling goals, and what else? And even for the athletes that I had that ran New York City, it was that, like, we talked about, hey, this is where I think you are time wise, but tell me, how do you want to feel? How do you want to feel? I want to feel joy. I want to feel happy. I want to feel like a badass, whatever it is. It's like, okay, so then what do we need to do in order to feel that? And that's definitely been a big shift for me in terms of trying to get people to see both, because your time goal is great and it's important, but that's not a guarantee in a race.
No, I always have my athletes do the ABC goals, sometimes D, depending on the thing and training and whatever. And usually only one of them is allowed to be a time goal. The rest all have to be something else. So it can be a feeling goal, a process goal, anything else. I can come up with a pacing goal, like you want a negative split, you want to do this, like anything else but a finish here. And the reason that I do that is not only does it make the race more enjoyable, right? If you want to find joy, you'll find joy. But so often, if you go into a race and at mile 9, my stomach was like, this is not going to happen, then what do? Like, do you just completely give up because you're like, do you do what an elite athlete does and you just DNF, or do you finish? And because you don't have a paycheck writing on it, so like, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep showing up to see what happens? Because it can change, right? A race can turn around.
Absolutely.
But you might still miss that time goal because you had a couple bad miles in the middle. Or if you have all these other things to focus on, you can just go to the next one. Like, okay, well, that's out, so what am I going to do next? And then you still can have a really great experience, which my Chicago is a really good example of, even though the time goal didn't happen. So I think that's the way I coach them through it, is like one out of 3 or 4 can be time. That's it.
Yeah. And I come back to I always try to remind people, I'm like, is this your last race? All right. Like, is this the last marathon you're ever going to do? Is this the last time you're ever going to run? Because if it is, then I can understand, I can understand wanting that goal and then really being disappointed if you don't get it. But if you plan on keeping on running, if you plan on seeing where it goes, then this is just another stop on that journey. This is just that's the biggest reframe of seeing it not as a, quote unquote failure, but as an opportunity to learn, right? An opportunity to learn what worked, what didn't work, the mental tools you used to get yourself there. And I love that you mentioned the whole, elite athletes just dropping off, because I was talking to someone last week about it, of how the standards are so different, right? Like it's an elite athlete drops off and everyone's like, good for you. Like no one bats an eye, but then you don't get your PR, or I don't know. Like, it's just to me, it's so silly. And it's just hopefully a reminder to everyone, like, no one really cares, right? Like, no one really cares. You do, like, you're going to care. Your coach is going to care, but your coach is only going to care so far as you're mentally well, right? Like,
That's what I was just going to say, is your coach only cares because you care.
Yeah.
If you totally blow up and you are so stoked about it, guess who should be cheerleading for you louder than you're cheerleading for yourself? It should be your coach. Like,
Absolutely.
they only want you to achieve the goal you want to achieve. They're not your coach should not have their own agenda in like what they're helping you to do. It should purely be based on what you want to do and feel up to doing. And if you're stoked with whatever happens, then they should be stoked for you.
Yeah. I mean, 100%, 100%. I had, again, I had texted my coach in the middle of the race, and I texted her with, physically I'm fine, emotionally I'm heartbroken, or mentally I'm broken, something like that. I don't even remember what it was. She was like, I'm so sorry. And I mean, she obviously has known everything that I've gone through. And I'm like, yeah, it is what it is. And I feel like the longer I've been in this sport, the more, and I'm not perfect and I still struggle with it, but the easier I feel like I've become at recovering from, quote unquote, bad races, where I have to remind myself this race isn't going to stop me from running. It's not going to stop me from doing another marathon. It's not going to stop me from entering another training cycle. So at the end of the day, I didn't really lose anything. Nothing really was horribly wrong. It just, that's the day that I needed to have for whatever reason. And I learned something very powerful about myself, which is I'm a master at holding in tears. So that's like pretty good at that. And that the training worked, right? Because if the training hadn't worked, I wouldn't have been able to keep physically moving forward. The training did work. So
I would say also to like, it's okay to take time and save space to grieve a bad race too. Like, it's okay to do that. You're allowed, even if like my dear loving husband would never understand. Some of my good friends are like, it's a marathon, you finished, it's so good. Like, you're allowed to be sad and you're allowed to grieve that a race didn't go the way you wanted. Like, even if nobody understands and you have to do it crying in the shower, like, you're allowed to be sad about that. And it doesn't take away running, and it doesn't mean you can't ever do it again. It doesn't stop you from doing any of the things,
yeah, I always say you can have a pity party, just don't stay, right?
Yes.
Give yourself the pity party. You're the guest of honor. Just don't overstay it. Don't overstay it. Cause I've also been there where I had a disappointing race and I moped about it for weeks. I mean, weeks. And it wasn't helpful. And and again, it goes back to like this bigger theme of grief, right? Of what is considered, and I'm using again quotes here, like an appropriate time to grieve a race that did not go as desired, right? You spend 6 to 8 months, however long, right? Some of us spend a lot longer training for a marathon, and then you don't have the day. And that's not something that you can come back from quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, for you, you have the depths of having visualized it. That's another layer of the experience. It's not just going into it thinking, like for myself, where I'm like, yeah, 4:30, but to have like visualize it, like you're feeling it, you're creating it in your body.
Oh yeah. It was a very strange experience. So,
but we're still doing it, right?
yeah, still here. 50K, here I come.
50K, here you come. And I don't know what I'm doing next, but I'm open
Can't wait to see.
I'm open to it all at this point. I'm open to it all, and I'm trying to just enjoy it. Enjoy being in this space of not knowing and not necessarily having a plan, because I could have gone one of two directions, right? I could have gone in many directions, really moping about it or feeling like I needed a redemption race. And I'm just like, no, I'm good. Like I want this experience to exist on its own without me trying to do anything to forget it.
I always like a month before you make any big decisions after a marathon. Like I have thoughts about another one, but I haven't signed up for anything yet because beyond the 550K.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a good decision.
I don't think so either.
Like in space, right? And like let it be and work through the feelings and feel the feelings and then figure out what sounds fun.
Yeah.
Like what sounds fun. Because if it doesn't sound fun, why are we doing this thing?
Yeah, I agree. Jen, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was so fun.
Another great conversation, another breaking down of these races that break our hearts, but not our spirits, right? Like that's the theme. Break our hearts, just not our spirits. And we're going to keep on coming back because we love you, running. We love you. So whether it's a 50K.
My favorite part of coaching and running is the running debrief pre-race, like getting into all the things. So anytime.
Yeah, I love it. Can you, before we sign off here, can you just remind us where to get more information about you?
I am Misadventures of a Marathoner. On Instagram, that's my handle, and my website is misadventuresofaMarathoner.com.
There you go. Y'all, thanks for tuning in, listening to us talk about races and the little snippets of run coaching. Jen, as always, I love talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone, we'll see you next time. Bye.